Thursday night, Sarah was staying at Jessica's apartment when her phone rang at 2 a.m. The caller ID showed the coffee shop's security system. "This is Allied Security," the voice said urgently. "We have a break-in alarm at your business. The police have been notified, but you should get down here immediately." Sarah threw on clothes and rushed to the coffee shop with Jessica driving. When they arrived, they found 2 police cars with flashing lights and a small crowd of neighbors who had heard the alarm. But something felt wrong immediately. Officer Reynolds was there again, and he seemed annoyed rather than concerned. "False alarm," he announced as Sarah approached. "The security company made a mistake. Everything's fine here." But Miguel, who lived in the apartment above the flower shop next door, pulled Sarah aside. "That's not true," he whispered. "I saw 2 men go into your shop about an hour ago. They had keys. When the alarm went off, they ran out the back. I tried to tell the officer, but he wouldn't listen to me." Sarah's stomach dropped. She insisted on checking inside the coffee shop, despite Officer Reynolds's protests that it was unnecessary. What she found made her blood run cold. Someone had clearly been inside, but they hadn't stolen anything. Instead, they had planted evidence. There were small bags of white powder hidden behind the coffee machine and underneath the cash register. There were unmarked bottles of what looked like illegal liquor hidden in the storage room. There was even drug paraphernalia scattered in the office. "Oh my God," Jessica breathed. "They're trying to frame you." Sarah immediately called Janet Morrison, who arrived within minutes along with a private investigator she'd worked with before. They documented everything with photographs and carefully collected the planted evidence without disturbing it too much. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Janet said grimly. "Williams is trying to manufacture grounds for the police to shut you down and arrest you. If Miguel hadn't seen the men planting this stuff, you could have been facing serious criminal charges." The private investigator, a former police detective named Carlos Mendez, examined the scene carefully. "The good news is that this was done sloppily. There are no fingerprints on any of the planted items, which is suspicious. And the placement is all wrong. No one really using drugs would hide them in these locations." But Sarah realized that Williams's plan might work anyway. Even if the charges didn't stick, the arrest and publicity would destroy her reputation and force her to close the coffee shop while fighting the legal battle. "We need to turn this around on him," Janet said. "Carlos, how quickly can you get those security cameras from the building across the street? The owner's a friend of mine. I can probably get the footage tonight." By dawn, they had the evidence they needed. The security camera clearly showed 2 men entering the coffee shop with keys at 1:30 a.m. and leaving hastily when the alarm sounded at 2:15 a.m. More importantly, Carlos had enhanced the footage enough to get clear images of their faces. "I know. These guys," Carlos said excitedly. "They're private security contractors who work for several developers around the city, and one of them has a criminal record for burglary and drug possession." Janet smiled grimly. "Perfect. Now we have Williams for criminal conspiracy, breaking and entering and attempting to frame an innocent person. This is going to be front-page news." At 9 a.m., they held an emergency press conference in front of the coffee shop. Sarah stood, with Janet, Carlos, and Miguel as they revealed the attempted frame-up to a crowd of reporters and community members. The security footage played on a laptop for the cameras, clearly showing the break-in and evidence planting. Marcus Williams has escalated from harassment and intimidation to actual criminal activity, Sarah announced to the crowd. "He was so desperate to shut down our community resistance that he was willing to plant drugs in a local business and try to have me arrested on false charges." The story exploded across local media. By noon, every television station in the city was running footage of the break-in. Social media was buzzing with outrage about Williams's tactics. The mayor's office issued a statement promising a full investigation, but the most significant response came from an unexpected source. At 3 p.m., Richard Stone, Williams' lawyer, called Sarah directly. "Ms. Chen, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about resolving this situation." "I'm listening," Sarah said, putting the call on speaker so Janet could hear. "My client is prepared to make a substantial offer for your building. $200,000, well above market value, with a 60-day closing timeline." Sarah almost laughed. Yesterday, your people offered me $25,000 and threatened me. Now it's $200,000? What changed? There was a long pause. The situation has become complicated. Mr. Williams would prefer to resolve this amicably. What about all the other businesses he's been harassing? What about the community's opposition to his development plans? Another pause. Mr. Williams is prepared to significantly modify his development proposal to address community concerns. Smaller scale, more affordable housing, preservation of existing businesses. Sarah looked at Janet, who was nodding encouragingly. This was more than they had dared hope for. Not just saving the coffee shop, but forcing Williams to change his entire approach to the neighborhood. I want that offer in writing, Sarah said, and I want the modified development plan submitted to the community for review before any sale is finalized. That can be arranged, and Mr. Williams needs to publicly apologize for his harassment of local businesses and make financial restitution to the other owners he's driven out. A longer pause. I'll discuss that with my client. After the call ended, Janet was practically beaming. Sarah, do you realize what just happened? You didn't just save your coffee shop, you completely changed the power dynamic in this neighborhood. But Sarah wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Why do you think Williams caved so quickly? Yesterday he was threatening me, and today he's offering me everything I want. Janet's expression grew serious. I made some calls this morning after the press conference. It turns out that Williams's financing for the development was dependent on closing the deals quietly and starting construction by a certain deadline. All the publicity and delays have spooked his investors. He's facing millions of dollars in penalties if he can't deliver on schedule. So he needs this to go away more than we need to keep fighting? Exactly. You've discovered the secret weapon that small communities have always had against powerful developers. Time. Williams has deadlines and financial pressures. You have community support and the moral high ground. As long as you can keep fighting, his position gets weaker every day. That evening, the coffee shop was packed with community members celebrating the victory. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade tamales. Elena's boys made a banner that read, "Community Power." Miguel told war stories to anyone who would listen. Dr. Patel and his colleagues discussed plans for a community health clinic. Sarah stood behind the counter serving coffee and watching the celebration, and realized that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just about saving one small business anymore. The fight against Marcus Williams had awakened something in the neighborhood that had been dormant, a sense of collective power and shared purpose. Williams had made one critical error in his assessment of Sarah Chen. He'd looked at her worn clothes and humble coffee shop and assumed he knew everything about her. He'd seen someone with nothing to fight back with. But Sarah's real strength had never been money or connections or political influence. Her strength was the community she'd helped build, one cup of coffee at a time. Her strength was the relationships she'd nurtured with neighbors who became friends, who became allies. Her strength was the willingness to stand up for something bigger than herself, even when the odds seemed impossible. 2 weeks later, Sarah signed the sale papers for $200,000, enough to pay off her debts and buy a larger building 3 blocks away for an expanded coffee shop and community center. Marcus Williams publicly apologized and announced a scaled-back development plan that preserved existing businesses and included affordable housing. More importantly, the neighborhood had discovered its own power. The community organization that had formed to fight Williams continued meeting, addressing other local issues and making sure that future developers would know they were dealing with an organized, engaged community that wouldn't be pushed around. Sarah kept Williams's original business card in a frame behind the counter of her new coffee shop, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. He'd walked into her old shop thinking he was dealing with someone who had nothing. He'd been wrong about that, just like he'd been wrong about everything else. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money or connections. It's a community that refuses to be intimidated, and a person brave enough to stand up and say no when everyone expects them to back down. David Park's article hit the front page of the Friday Morning City Chronicle with the headline, "David vs. Goliath. Local coffee shop owner takes on powerful developer." The article detailed Marcus Williams' pattern of intimidating small business owners and included Sarah's personal account of their meeting. By 10 a.m., the newspaper's website had crashed from heavy traffic and Sarah's phone hadn't stopped ringing. The first call came from a television news producer who wanted to interview Sarah for the evening news. The second came from a radio talk show host. The third was from Marcus Williams himself, and his voice was ice-cold with rage. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Sarah's hand trembled as she held the phone, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Williams, I simply told the truth about our conversation. Your truth is about to cost you everything. I want you to know that I take personal responsibility for what happens to you next. Are you threatening me?" "I don't make threats, Ms. Chen. I make promises. Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a mixture of fear and determination. She immediately called Janet Morrison to report the conversation. "Good," Janet said when Sarah finished describing the call. "We need to document everything. Did you record it?" "No, I didn't think to. Don't worry. From now on, record every conversation with Williams or his people. And Sarah, this call tells us something important. Williams is rattled. When bullies start making personal threats, it means their usual tactics aren't working." That afternoon brought the first wave of Williams's retaliation. A building inspector arrived with a work stoppage order, claiming that the coffee shop's occupancy permit was invalid due to a paperwork error from 2018. A fire marshal appeared an hour later, declaring that the kitchen's fire suppression system was inadequate and needed immediate replacement. By closing time, Sarah had received citations that would cost over $15,000 to address. But something unexpected happened as word of the harassment spread through the neighborhood. Instead of scaring people away, Williams' heavy-handed tactics seemed to galvanize the community. By evening, there were over a dozen people gathered in the coffee shop, helping Sarah document the citations and research her legal options. Dr. Patel brought a colleague who specialized in municipal law. Tom, the construction worker, offered to do the repair work at cost. Elena started a crowdfunding campaign online to help with the legal fees. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a phone tree to keep everyone informed of developments. "This is exactly what Williams doesn't want to see," Janet explained to the group. "He counts on isolating his targets and making them feel overwhelmed. Instead, his attacks are bringing the community together." The weekend canvassing effort was more successful than anyone had hoped. Teams of volunteers went door to door throughout the neighborhood, explaining Williams's development plans and the threat they posed to existing businesses and residents. They discovered that many people had already heard rumors about forced buyouts and gentrification, and most were strongly opposed to Williams' plans. Miguel, despite his age, turned out to be one of the most effective canvassers. His military, bearing, and obvious sincerity convinced many skeptical residents to join the cause. "This isn't about politics," he told people. "This is about whether our community gets to survive or whether it gets bulldozed for condos that none of us can afford." By Sunday evening, they had collected over 300 signatures on a petition opposing Williams's development plans. More importantly, they had identified dozens of residents who were willing to attend the Monday demonstration and future community meetings. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a cold wind, but by 11 a.m., over 200 people had gathered outside Williams Development Group's downtown office building. Sarah stood on the steps with a megaphone, flanked by Janet Morrison and several other community leaders. The crowd was diverse and passionate. There were families with children, elderly residents in wheelchairs, college students with homemade signs, and business owners in work clothes. Local television crews were filming and newspaper photographers were capturing images of the peaceful but determined protesters. "Marcus Williams thinks he can bully small businesses and destroy communities because we don't have the money to fight back," Sarah said into the megaphone, her voice carrying across the crowd. "But he's wrong. We have something more powerful than money. We have each other, and we have the truth on our side." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline as she realized that this woman speaking confidently to hundreds of people was actually her. 3. Weeks ago, she'd been intimidated by one arrogant developer in her coffee shop. Now she was leading a community movement. Inside the gleaming office building, Marcus Williams watched the demonstration from his 23rd floor window with growing fury. His assistant had shown him the morning news coverage, which portrayed him as a wealthy bully picking on small businesses. His phone had been ringing all morning with calls from city council members distancing themselves from his project and investors expressing concern about the negative publicity. "Sir," his assistant said nervously, "Channel 7 is requesting a statement about the allegations in the newspaper article." "No comment," Marcus snapped. "And get me Richard Stone on the phone. It's time to escalate this situation." Outside, the demonstration continued for 2 hours. Speakers included other business owners who had faced Williams's pressure tactics, community residents who opposed gentrification, and local elected officials who had previously been silent about Williams's methods. The crowd remained peaceful, but passionate, and the media coverage was extensive. As the demonstration wound down, Sarah felt exhausted but triumphant. The turnout had exceeded everyone's expectations, and the media coverage would make it much harder for Williams to operate in the shadows. But Janet Morrison pulled her aside with a worried expression. "Sarah, I need to prepare you for what's coming next." Williams' usual pattern is to escalate dramatically when public pressure tactics start working. The next few days could be very difficult. Janet was right. Tuesday morning brought a new level of harassment. Sarah arrived at the coffee shop to find that someone had spray-painted "Closed soon" across her front windows in red paint. The locks on her door had been filled with glue, making it impossible to open without calling a locksmith. When she finally got inside, she discovered that someone had shut off the power to her refrigerators overnight, spoiling hundreds of dollars worth of food. Sarah called the police, but the responding officer seemed uninterested in investigating. "Probably just kids," he said dismissively. "You should consider getting better security." But when Sarah mentioned the officer's name to Janet Morrison, Janet's expression grew grim. "That's Officer Reynolds. He's married to Williams's cousin. I should have warned you that Williams has connections throughout the city government." Wednesday brought an even more serious escalation. Sarah was working alone in the coffee shop when 2 men in expensive suits walked in. They weren't customers. Their cold eyes and aggressive posture made that clear immediately. "Ms. Chen," the taller one said, "we're here on behalf of Mr. Williams. He'd like to make you a final offer." Sarah's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not interested in any offers from Mr. Williams." "You should be," the second man said, stepping closer to the counter. "Because this is the last time he's going to ask nicely." The first man placed a briefcase on the counter and opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000, even less than Williams's original offer. "Take this money and disappear," he said quietly. "Sign over the deed to your building and leave town. If you don't, things are going to get very unpleasant for you." Sarah stared at the check, knowing that this was probably her last chance to walk away from the fight. $25,000 wouldn't solve her financial problems, but it would give her enough money to start over somewhere else. She could avoid whatever Williams was planning to do next, but then she thought about Miguel and Mrs. Rodriguez and Elena and all the other people who were counting on her to stand strong. She thought about her grandmother, who had faced much worse threats and never backed down. She thought about the Martinez family bakery and all the other businesses that had been destroyed because no one had been willing to fight back. "No," she said firmly, closing the briefcase and pushing it back across the counter. "I'm not leaving and I'm not selling." The 2 men exchanged glances. "That's unfortunate," the first one said. "Mr. Williams gave you every opportunity to resolve this quietly. Tell Mr. Williams that this community isn't afraid of him," Sarah replied. "And tell him that we're just getting started." After the men left, Sarah immediately called Janet Morrison and reported the incident. Janet listened grimly and then said something that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Sarah, you need to stay with friends for the next few days, and we need to organize round-the-clock security for the coffee shop. Williams has moved beyond harassment into direct intimidation. which means he's getting desperate, but it also means he's about to make a mistake that will finally give us the evidence we need to stop him. That evening, as Sarah packed a bag to stay with Jessica, the community meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. Sarah spent the entire day nervous, wondering if anyone would actually show up. She'd put flyers around the neighborhood and personally invited her regular customers, but she had no idea if people would take time out of their busy lives to fight Marcus Williams. At 6:30, she started rearranging the tables in the coffee shop to create a meeting space. At 6:45, Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with her husband and teenage daughter. At 6:50, Dr. Patel walked in with 2 other doctors from the hospital. By 7 o'clock, the coffee shop was packed with over 30 people. Elena was there, with her twin boys who colored quietly in the corner while the adults talked. Miguel had brought 3 other veterans from his weekly chess games. Tom, the construction worker, came straight from his job site, still wearing his hard hat. There were teachers from the elementary school, nurses from the hospital, college students, retirees, and small business owners from throughout the neighborhood. Janet Morrison arrived exactly at 7, carrying a briefcase and wearing a confident smile. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Thank you all for coming," Janet began, standing in front of the assembled group. "I know this is unusual, and I know you're all busy people, but what's happening in this neighborhood isn't unusual at all. In fact, it's become quite common in cities across the country." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a map of the city, which she taped to the wall behind her. Red X's marked various locations throughout the city. Each of these X's represents a neighborhood where Marcus Williams has successfully displaced existing businesses and residents to build luxury developments. In every case, he used the same tactics: lowball offers, intimidation, strategic code violations, and political pressure. A murmur went through the crowd. Many people hadn't realized the scope of Williams's operations. "The question you have to ask yourselves," Janet continued, "is whether you want your neighborhood to be the next red X on this map." Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand. "What exactly are you proposing we do? Williams has money and connections. Most of us are just working people trying to get by." "That's exactly why you have more power than you realize," Janet replied. "Williams's developments only work if he can quietly force out existing businesses and residents. But if the whole community stands together and fights back publicly, his tactics become much less effective." She pulled out another document, a timeline of events in other neighborhoods where Williams had been successfully resisted. In the Riverside district, community organizing delayed his development by 2 years. During that time, property values actually increased because people wanted to live in a neighborhood where residents stood up for each other. Williams eventually gave up and moved on to easier targets. Dr. Patel spoke up. "What specific actions are you talking about?" Janet smiled. "I'm glad you asked. We use a multi-pronged approach. First, we document everything. Every interaction with Williams or his representatives, every suspicious inspection, every code violation. We build an airtight case that shows a pattern of harassment." She counted off on her fingers. Second, we use media pressure. David Park's article about Sarah's situation will be published in tomorrow's paper. But we don't stop there. We contact television news stations, radio shows, and social media influencers. We make Williams' tactics a public relations nightmare for him. Third, we use legal challenges. We file complaints about harassment and abuse of power. We challenge suspicious code violations. We request public records to show how Williams' political donations correlate with favorable treatment from city officials. Elena raised her hand tentatively. "But won't all this just make him angrier? I have kids to think about." Janet's expression softened. "I understand your concern, Elena, and I won't lie to you. Williams will probably escalate his tactics before he gives up, but the alternative is letting him destroy your community piece by piece. And when communities stand together, they're much safer than when individuals face bullies alone." Miguel, the elderly veteran, stood up slowly. "I fought in Vietnam because I believed in defending communities from bullies. I'm 82 years old, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some rich boy in a fancy suit destroy the neighborhood I've called home for 20 years. His words sparked something in the room. Other people began standing and voicing their commitment. Tom, the construction worker, offered to help with any repairs needed to fight code violations. The teachers said they'd contact parents at the school to spread awareness. The doctors promised to provide medical documentation if anyone was hurt. During protests or demonstrations, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the show of support. She'd expected maybe a dozen people to show up, and here were over 30 neighbors ready to fight for the community. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked Janet. "You're going to be the public face of this campaign," Janet replied. "Your coffee shop is the symbol of what we're trying to preserve, a family business that serves the community rather than just extracting profit from it. Are you prepared for that kind of visibility?" Sarah thought about the black SUV that had been watching her shop, about the threatening phone call from Williams' lawyer, about the suspicious health inspection. Then she looked around the room at all the faces turned toward her with hope and determination. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." Janet smiled. "Good. Then let's talk strategy. Tomorrow morning, David Park's article will hit the newspaper stands and go online. By noon, I want to have organized a peaceful demonstration outside Williams's downtown office. We'll invite all the media outlets in the city." She turned to address the whole room. "But before we do any of that, I need everyone here to understand something. This is going to be a real fight. Williams has more money and political connections than we do. He's going to fight dirty, and things might get worse before they get better." The room fell quiet. Janet let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. "But here's what Williams doesn't understand. He sees this neighborhood as just another development opportunity. You see it as home. He has money. But you have something more powerful. You have each other, and you have the truth on your side." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up. "What do we do first?" Janet pulled out a stack of clipboards. "First, we make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows what's happening. We're going to canvass door to door this weekend and talk to every resident and business owner. We're going to build a coalition that's too big and too loud for Williams to ignore." As people began signing up for different tasks, Sarah felt a transformation happening inside her. For days, she'd felt like a victim, powerless against Marcus Williams' money and connections. But surrounded by her neighbors and community members, she realized that Williams had made a crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that by threatening one small business owner, he could quietly take what he wanted. Instead, he'd awakened something that had been sleeping in the neighborhood, a sense of community pride and collective power that would be much harder to defeat than one scared woman with a coffee shop. The meeting ended with plans for the weekend canvassing effort and the Monday demonstration. As people filed out of the coffee shop, many of them stopped to hug Sarah or shake her hand or promise their continued support. When the last person had left, Sarah looked around the empty coffee shop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Williams would probably escalate his tactics once he realized what he was facing. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Sarah felt like she wasn't facing those challenges alone. 3 days after her interview with David Park, Sarah was cleaning tables when she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It had been there for over an hour, and the man behind the wheel seemed to be watching her coffee shop. When she looked directly at him, he quickly looked away and started his engine. That evening, as Sarah was closing up, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Sarah Chen?" The voice was professional but cold. "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Richard Stone. I'm an attorney representing Williams Development Group. I understand you've been speaking with journalists about my client's business practices." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "I have the right to speak to whoever I want." "Of course you do," Stone replied smoothly. "However, I want to make sure you understand the potential consequences of making false statements about Mr. Williams. Defamation lawsuits can be very expensive to defend against, especially for someone in your financial situation. I haven't made any false statements." "That's good to hear. I also wanted to inform you that Mr. Williams has decided to withdraw his purchase offer. Given the adversarial nature of your recent actions, He no longer sees this as a beneficial business relationship. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Without Williams's offer, even the lowball one, she had no clear path to paying off her debts. You can't just, actually we can. The offer was made in good faith, but you chose to involve the media instead of negotiating professionally. Mr. Williams wishes you the best of luck with your business. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, feeling a familiar wave of panic wash over her. Without the sale, she'd be facing bankruptcy within months. Maybe Marcus Williams had been right. Maybe she really did have nothing to fight back with. The next morning brought more bad news. A city inspector showed up at opening time, clipboard in hand and a stern expression on his face. "I'm here for a health department inspection," he announced. "I'll need to examine your food preparation areas, storage facilities, and equipment." Sarah had passed health inspections before, but never with an inspector this thorough. He spent 3 hours examining every corner of the kitchen, measuring temperatures, checking dates on ingredients, and taking extensive notes. He found violations that previous inspectors had overlooked: a refrigerator that was 1 degree too warm, a hand-washing sink that was 2 inches too low according to the latest regulations, a grease trap that needed cleaning. "I'm issuing citations for these violations," he said, handing her a thick stack of papers. "You'll need to correct these issues within 10 days and schedule a re-inspection or face fines and possible closure." Sarah looked at the citations with growing despair. The cost of fixing everything would be thousands of dollars she didn't have. The refrigerator alone would need to be replaced, and moving the hand-washing sink would require a plumber and possibly a contractor. After the inspector left, Sarah called her friend Jessica in tears. "I can't afford to fix all this stuff, and even if I could, I'm sure they'll just find something else wrong next time." "This is harassment, Sarah. Williams is using the city to pressure you. But what can I do about it? I can't prove he's behind it." "Maybe not, but David Park might be interested in this development. Have you heard from him since the interview?" Sarah wiped her eyes. "No, but his article should be coming out soon. Maybe when people read it, they'll understand what's happening here." That afternoon, Dr. Patel stopped by for his usual coffee. He immediately noticed Sarah's red eyes and distressed expression. "Everything okay, Sarah?" Sarah found herself pouring out the whole story. Williams' threats, the withdrawn offer, the suspicious inspection. Dr. Patel listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," he said when she finished. "I serve on the hospital's community outreach board, and we've been discussing Williams's development plans for this neighborhood. What you're describing sounds like a pattern we've seen in other areas." "What do you mean?" "Williams doesn't just want to build condos. He wants to gentrify the entire area, which means pushing out the businesses and families that make this community what it is. The hospital board is actually concerned about this because many of our patients live in this neighborhood. If Williams succeeds, they'll be forced to move farther away from medical care." Dr. Patel pulled out his business card and wrote something on the back. "This is the phone number for Janet Morrison. She's a community organizer who's been fighting Williams' developments in other neighborhoods. I think you should talk to her." That evening, Sarah called the number. Janet Morrison answered on the second ring, and her voice was warm and energetic. "Dr. Patel told me you might call," Janet said. "I've been following Williams' activities in your neighborhood. How bad has it gotten?" Sarah explained everything: the lowball offer, the threats, the withdrawn deal, the suspicious inspection. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "Sarah, what you're describing is Williams's standard playbook. He's used these exact same tactics in 3 other neighborhoods over the past 4 years. The good news is that we've learned how to fight back." "How?" "Community organizing. Community. Williams' power comes from isolating his targets and making them feel helpless. But when a whole community stands together, his tactics lose their effectiveness." Janet explained that she'd successfully organized resistance to Williams' developments before. "We use multiple strategies: media pressure, like the article you did with David Park; legal challenges when we can prove harassment or code violations; community rallies to show that people support the existing businesses; and most importantly, we document everything and build a paper trail." But I'm just one person running a coffee shop. I don't have experience with any of this. You don't need experience, Sarah. You need heart, and from what Dr. Patel told me, you have plenty of that. Besides, you won't be alone. There are other business owners in your neighborhood who are facing the same pressure, and there are community members who want to preserve what makes this area special. Janet paused. I have to ask, though, are you prepared for this to get harder before it gets better? Williams doesn't give up easily, and when he realizes you're organizing against him, he'll escalate his tactics. Sarah thought about her grandmother, who had faced much worse odds when she came to America with nothing. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and Elena and Miguel and all the other people who counted on the coffee shop as their gathering place. She thought about the Martinez family bakery and all the other businesses that had been destroyed because no one had stood up to Williams. Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready to fight. Good. I'll drive out to your neighborhood tomorrow evening. Can you invite some of the other business owners to meet with us? And any community members who might be interested in organizing, I think. So, a lot of people come through the coffee shop. I can spread the word. After she hung up, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Marcus Williams thought he could intimidate her into submission because he saw her as weak and isolated. But he was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful force isn't money or connections. It's a community that refuses to be pushed around. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop before dawn, just like she had every day for the past 5 years. But today felt different. Marcus Williams' words kept echoing in her head. You've got nothing, and I've got everything. The arrogance in his voice, the way he dismissed her grandmother's legacy like it meant nothing. It all burned in her chest like acid. She started the coffee machines and began mixing dough for the morning pastries, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about her grandmother's stories of coming to America with just a suitcase and determination. Grandma Chen had faced much worse than Marcus Williams, and she'd built something beautiful from nothing. The morning rush began as usual. Mrs. Rodriguez came in for her daily cappuccino before heading to her job at the hospital. Tom, the construction worker, grabbed his black coffee and chocolate croissant. The college students claimed their usual table in the corner, spreading textbooks and laptops across the surface. You look troubled, mija, Mrs. Rodriguez said as Sarah handed her the cappuccino. Mrs. Rodriguez had been coming here since the coffee shop opened, and she could read Sarah's moods better than most people. Just some business stuff, Sarah replied, forcing a smile. Nothing I can't handle. But Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't fooled. She'd raised 6 children and could spot worry from a mile away. If you need anything, you know where to find me. This neighborhood takes care of its own. Throughout the morning, Sarah found herself really looking at her customers for the first time in months. There was Elena, the single mother who brought her twin boys here every Saturday morning for hot chocolate and story time. There was Dr. Patel, who'd started coming here during his residency at the nearby hospital, and still stopped by, even though he now had his own practice across town. There was Miguel, the elderly veteran who spent his afternoons here playing chess with whoever would challenge him. These weren't just customers buying coffee. They were people whose lives were intertwined with this place. The coffee shop wasn't just a business. It was a community center, a second home, a place where people belonged. Around noon, a man in an expensive suit walked in. Sarah's heart sank, thinking it might be another one of Marcus Williams' associates. But when he approached the counter, his smile was genuine and warm. Are you Sarah Chen? He asked politely. Yes, that's me. How can I help you? My name is David Park. I'm a journalist with the City Chronicle. I've been researching Marcus Williams and his development practices for an investigative piece I'm working on. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions. Sarah glanced around the nearly empty coffee shop. The lunch rush wouldn't start for another hour. I suppose that would be okay. Would you like some coffee? That would be great. Thank you. As Sarah prepared his drink, David pulled out a small notebook. I understand Williams approached you about selling this building. How did you know that? I've been tracking his pattern. He always targets small, family-owned businesses in neighborhoods he wants to develop. He makes lowball offers and uses intimidation tactics when people don't immediately accept. Sarah set the coffee cup down in front of him. He offered me $40,000 for a building that's worth at least $150,000. When I didn't jump at his offer, he basically threatened me. David nodded grimly. That sounds exactly like his usual approach. Would you be willing to go on the record about your experience with him? Sarah hesitated. I don't know. He said he has connections with the city council. What if speaking out makes things worse for me? I understand your concern, David said, gently. But you should know that you're not the first person to tell me this story. In the past 3 years, Williams has forced out 12 small businesses using similar tactics. Most of the owners were too scared to speak up, which is exactly what he counts on. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Take a look at this. Sarah opened the folder and found newspaper clippings, photographs, and documents. There were pictures of demolished buildings that had once housed thriving small businesses. There were quotes from former business owners describing their encounters with Williams. There were city permits that seemed to have been fast-tracked through the approval process. This is the Martinez family bakery, David said, pointing to a photograph of a destroyed building. They'd been in business for 23 years. Williams offered them $30,000 for a building worth over $200,000. When they refused, suddenly they were hit with code violations and health department inspections every week. They couldn't afford to keep fighting, so they eventually sold. Sarah studied the photograph. She'd known the Martinez family bakery. Her grandmother used to buy their bread for the coffee shop's sandwiches. What happened to them? They moved to another state and never reopened. Mr. Martinez told me it broke his heart to leave the community they'd served for over 2 decades. David showed her more examples. A family restaurant that had been forced out, a small bookstore that couldn't compete with the constant harassment, an art supply shop that had served local artists for 15 years before Williams decided he wanted their corner location. The pattern is always the same, David explained. Williams identifies a neighborhood he wants to develop. He researches which businesses own their buildings versus which ones rent. Then he systematically targets the owners with lowball offers. If they refuse, he uses his political connections to make their lives miserable until they give up. Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. How does he get away with this? Money and connections. He donates to city council campaigns. He has lawyers who know how to work the system. And most importantly, he targets people who don't have the resources to fight back effectively. David leaned forward. But here's the thing, Sarah. I've been building this story for months, and I have enough evidence to expose his methods. What I need is someone brave enough to speak on the record about their personal experience, someone who can put a human face on what Williams is doing to this community. Sarah closed the folder and sat back in her chair. She thought about her grandmother again, about the courage it had taken to start over in a new country. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and Elena and Dr. Patel and all the other people who depended on this place. If I agree to be interviewed, what happens next? She asked. I publish the story, and it puts pressure on Williams to change his tactics. It also alerts other business owners about what they might be facing. And it gives the community information they need to push back against his development plans. Sarah looked around the coffee shop one more time. The afternoon light was streaming through the windows, illuminating the photos of Taiwan on the walls and the handwritten menu her grandmother had created. Marcus Williams saw this place as nothing more than an obstacle to his profits. But Sarah knew better. Okay, she said finally. Let's do the interview, but I want you to understand something first. This isn't just about one coffee shop. This is about whether communities have the right to exist or whether everything gets bulldozed for the highest bidder. David smiled and opened his notebook. That's exactly the story I'm hoping to tell. As they began the interview, Sarah felt something shift inside her. For the first time since meeting Marcus Williams, she didn't feel powerless. She was beginning to realize that sometimes the best weapon against a bully wasn't money or connections. It was the truth. Marcus Williams adjusted his expensive watch and glanced around the small coffee shop with barely concealed disgust. The paint was peeling from the walls, the chairs looked like they belonged in a thrift store, and the whole place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and broken dreams. He couldn't believe his business partner had suggested meeting here instead of their usual upscale restaurant downtown. "Sorry I'm late," came a soft voice behind him. Marcus turned around and had to suppress a laugh. The woman standing there looked exactly like what he'd expected from someone who owned this dump of a coffee shop. Her jeans had small holes near the knees, her sneakers were worn and faded, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, and her hands looked like they'd seen plenty of hard work. "You must be Sarah," Marcus said, not bothering to stand or extend his hand. "I'm Marcus Williams from Williams Development Group." Sarah Chen nodded and slipped into the seat across from him. She'd heard about Marcus Williams. Everyone in the neighborhood had. He was the guy who bought up small businesses and old buildings, tore them down and put up expensive condos that nobody who actually lived here could afford. "Thank you for meeting with me," Sarah said quietly. "I know you're a busy man." Marcus smirked. "Well, when someone's sitting on a piece of property I want, I make time, even if it means coming to places like this." He gestured around the coffee shop dismissively. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice calm. "This coffee shop has been in my family for 12 years. My grandmother started it when she came here from Taiwan with nothing but a few recipes and a dream." "How touching," Marcus replied, pulling out his phone to check messages. "Look, I'll be straight with you. This whole block is going to change whether you like it or not. I've already bought out Mrs. Peterson's flower shop next door and the old bookstore on the corner. Your little coffee shop is the last piece I need for my new development project." He finally looked up from his phone and studied Sarah with cold calculation. "I'm prepared to offer you $40,000 for this place. That's more than generous considering the condition it's in." Sarah's eyes widened. $40,000 wouldn't even cover half of what she still owed on the building, let alone give her enough to start over somewhere else. "Mr. Williams, this building is worth at least $150,000. The location alone, the location is worth something to me because I can tear this dump down and build something useful," Marcus interrupted. "To anyone else, this is just an old building with outdated plumbing and a roof that probably leaks. $40,000 is my offer. Take it or leave it." Sarah looked around the coffee shop that had been her world for the past 5 years. After her grandmother passed away, she'd dropped out of college to keep the business running. Every morning at 5 a.m. she was here baking fresh pastries and brewing coffee. Every evening she stayed late doing the books and planning for the next day. The customers weren't just customers to her. They were neighbors, friends, people who depended on this place. "I need some time to think about it," Sarah said finally. Marcus laughed harshly. "Time? Honey, you don't have time. I've got city council members who owe me favors, and I've got lawyers who eat small business owners like you for breakfast. If you don't take my offer, I'll find other ways to get what I want. Trust me, you don't want to make this difficult." He stood up and dropped a business card on the table. "You've got 1 week to decide. And let me give you some free advice. Don't try to fight this. You've got nothing and I've got everything. This is just business." As Marcus walked toward the door, he turned back with a cruel smile. "Oh, and one more thing. I'd start looking for a new job if I were you. 40,000 won't last long for someone like you." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet coffee shop. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the scratched wooden tables and mismatched chairs that her grandmother had collected over the years. Each piece had a story. The corner booth where old Mr. Martinez came every Tuesday to read his newspaper. The small table by the window where teenage couples shared their first dates over hot chocolate. Sarah picked up Marcus's business card and stared at it. Williams Development Group. She'd researched him before this meeting, of course. On paper, Marcus Williams looked impressive. Harvard Business School graduate, successful real estate developer, member of the Chamber of Commerce. What the newspapers didn't mention was how he operated, how he bullied small business owners and destroyed communities to build his sterile developments. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked 16-hour days to build this place from nothing. Grandma Chen had always told her that respect wasn't something you could buy with money. It was something you earned through how you treated people. Marcus Williams clearly had never learned that lesson. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jessica. "How did the meeting go? Please tell me he made a decent offer." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "He offered 40,000. Wants an answer in a week." Her phone immediately rang. 40,000? Jessica's voice was incredulous. "Sarah, that's insulting. That building is worth at least 3 times that much." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But he made it clear that if I don't take his offer, he'll make my life difficult. He said he has connections with the city council." "So, what are you going to do?" Sarah looked around the coffee shop one more time, taking in every detail, the faded photographs of Taiwan on the walls, the espresso machine her grandmother had saved for 2 years to buy, the handwritten menu board with daily specials written in her grandmother's careful script. "I honestly don't know," she admitted. "He thinks I have nothing to fight back with. Maybe he's right." But even as she said the words, something deep inside Sarah began to stir. Marcus Williams had made one crucial mistake in his assessment of her. He'd looked at her worn clothes and humble coffee shop and assumed he knew everything about her. He had no idea what Sarah Chen was truly capable of when pushed too far.